Hey everyone, welcome back to Wicked Deeds. We're your hosts. I'm Brittany.
And I'm John.
And today we'll be covering a case where a report of smoke coming from a wooded area off the highway revealed itself to be something far more sinister than first responders initially believed. With their investigation unfolding, authorities soon discovered that a well-liked man who had seemingly no enemies had been brutally murdered. As police continued to search for the person responsible for this senseless execution, rumors of a potential motive began to swirl, prompting members of the local communities to fear they may be next. Now, over a decade later, detectives working the case have asserted that they have very specific questions that need answering, and with the public's help, they may be able to finally apprehend the monster behind this vicious crime. Today's case is about the murder of Michael Kleiman. On Friday, July 25th, 2008, the East Kingston Fire Department received a call regarding heavy smoke in the area of Route 32 and Route 9 West in East Kingston, New York. The firefighters were dispatched to the call and arrived to what's been described as an unused road, which seems to be near Devil's Lake. They arrived on scene sometime around 2:45 p.m. to find a 2004 light gray Nissan Frontier pickup truck on fire. Upon further inspection, the responding firemen discovered that there was actually a body burning in that truck. At first, authorities weren't able to identify who this body belonged to, but they had a sneaking suspicion that it could have been a man named Michael Kleiman, as he was the registered owner of the Nissan Frontier that had been found. Now, Michael Kleiman was a 59-year-old man who lived alone in Kerhonkson, New York, which is a pretty rural town located in the southern area of the state. He'd bought his home on Sundown Road in 1992 and loved where he lived very much. His brother Mark told the Poughkeepsie Journal, quote, "He did not like New York City. He was a country boy, and he liked living in the woods. He made his choices for those reasons," end quote. Michael had been described as a quiet man who often kept to himself, but he was personable and got along with pretty much everyone he met and was well-liked. Michael's brother Mark described him as, quote, "eccentric." Michael also really enjoyed frequenting antique stores and local auctions, as he was an avid collector. At the time, Michael was employed at Stony Lodge Hospital located in Westchester County, Ossining, New York, which was a psychiatric hospital for children and adolescents, but unfortunately the hospital has since closed. While Michael was employed there, though, he worked as a nurse's aide.
So it was a children's psychiatric hospital?
Correct.
Makes me think of the Lad Center.
Yeah, well, now that it's closed, I wonder if it's got some, weird, spooky thing going on with it.
Some bad history?
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. He absolutely loved his job, and the work he did with the kids at the hospital completely and totally fulfilled him. So much so that he made the incredibly long and arduous commute from his home in Kerhonkson to the hospital for nearly every shift. The distance between the two was approximately 85 miles, or an hour and 40-minute drive. But it has been stated that on the weekends, when Michael worked double shifts, he'd travel to his mother Bella's home in Bronxville, New York to sleep there, and then make the shorter commute from his mom's place to his job.
I'd really have to love my job to drive 85 miles each way.
Honestly, imagine, that's almost 4 hours out of your day.
And that's assuming no traffic problems, no weather problems.
Yeah, imagine snow in New York.
Mm-hmm.
That must be horrible.
And I always say it's nice to live near work because you never get that time back. So if he's driving almost 2 hours each way, That's 4 extra hours of his workday that he's never getting paid for.
Exactly. And then imagine doing that if you worked 2 doubles in a row. So Saturdays and Sundays, I think it was, that he would work his double shifts. So it's you're working 16 hours already, and then you're taking 4 hours for your drives. What do you have? 4 hours to sleep? No wonder he went to his mom's.
Yeah, I was going to say, but he went and stayed at his mom's on those days, though.
Yeah. His mother's home in Bronxville was just under a 2-hour drive away from Michael's house, but only about 15 or 20 minutes north of the hospital. So it did make perfect sense for him to stay there. It was a win-win. He shortened his commute, and it allowed him more time to rest in between shifts, And he got to spend time with his mother, who he was extremely close with. And I will say, as we dive further into what comes of this case, based on what's been reported, it doesn't seem as though there was any sort of concern for Michael's well-being at this point, and there were no indications that he wasn't at work or reported missing or really anything like that at all before this call for smoke along Route 32 came in.
So did he only work 2 doubles a week?
That I'm not entirely sure of. Unfortunately, there isn't a ton of information out there about Michael and kind of his background, his job, all the things that he did. Everything I've already told you is like the same stuff in every single article. So I don't know if he worked other shifts. I have to assume he might have. I mean, maybe he worked 40 hours, so.
I would assume that he worked at least a couple other shifts normally, just because you had said that when he worked doubles, he stayed with his mother. So it's not like all the time whenever he worked, he would stay at his mother's and then go home.
Yeah,
on
correct.
The other days, so.
Yep. Pretty much immediately after the burning truck had been found, Ulster County PD would take over the investigation, as it appears as though East Kingston is a section of the town of Ulster and doesn't seem to have its own dedicated police department. The 2 responding officers to the scene after the body was found by the fire department were Detective Kyle Berardi and Detective Brian Reevey, and they would pretty much handle the case moving forward, with Detective Berardi taking the lead. Right off the bat, authorities worked to search the wooded area surrounding where the truck had been found to see if they could find any evidence or clues that might help them figure out what had happened. It was also reported that checkpoints had been set up near the area of where the burned truck was discovered. My guess as to why they set up these checkpoints was to try and find individuals who frequented the area regularly and might have noticed something out of the ordinary on their normal daily drive.
I would have to assume, too, like the idea with the checkpoints is this wasn't a fire that was going on for a long time. So most likely this was something that was set most recently, and then somebody called in the smoke, and then the fire department got there, and then they discovered the body in there.
That's what it seems like.
So if they act quick enough, there's a chance that they put the checkpoints in there. Maybe the person that could be responsible, if this is, a murder investigation at this point, maybe that person's still in the area and they can have some type of log of people that were going in and out of the area.
Yeah, that's a good point. Now, before we move forward in the story and discuss authorities' investigation, let's review the area of where this Nissan Frontier was found. The reporting on this particular aspect of the case seems to have evolved a bit over time, but overall, the fact that it was found off the Route 32 and Route 9 West area seems to be the most commonly reported. I also looked up where Devil's Lake is, as that location had been mentioned a couple times, and it appears to be kind of set back a bit more from the main road off Route 32, kind of closer to the Hudson River. Some articles also reported that the car was found only about 1,000 feet off of Route 32, but I do have a map on our socials if you want to take a look and get a better idea of where the truck was found.
Okay, so I opened all the pictures.
Yeah, that's fine.
Sundown Road, that's his house?
Sundown Road's his house, yep.
A little farm area. So then...
What map are you looking at?
I'm looking at the Devil's Lake one.
Okay, so over to the left-hand side, there's like that big yellow line that says New York Route 32.
Yep.
And then there's 9 West, where there's like a little intersection more to the south.
Mm-hmm.
So it said originally that that's where the car was found. Then, like I said, it kind of evolved over time. So then you were seeing some articles saying, oh, it was only about 1,000 feet off the road. But then
Where's
you also...
9 West?
9 West is more south. If you had looked at the other map that I sent, it's a little bit easier to see, but it is...
Yep, I see it.
Yeah, so if you move south, you can see like a big intersection there. There's the 9 West, and then kind of up in the right-hand corner is Devil's Lake.
Mm-hmm.
So this is where I got confused a little bit with the exact location. Like, it's somewhere within this wooded area where his car was found, because it was found on an unused road. So there's no real specificity to exactly where it was, but it was somewhere between like this intersection and then like north a little bit where Devil's Lake is, I would assume.
Okay, so it's pretty far from the intersection.
If that's where it was, yes. Because it's not for sure that it was found near Devil's Lake, because there has been stuff that said like, oh, it was right near the Route 32 9 West intersection.
Yeah.
Only 1,000 feet off the road. So then like, where would that be? Because 1,000 feet off the road there looks like woods to me.
If you're going in like an eastbound way.
Mm-hmm. But either way, it kind of gives you a good idea of like what the area looked like. It's definitely wooded, but there's also like this suburban type, kind of shopping center area south.
Yep. So I'm just trying to use this interactive map here.
Mm-hmm.
It can't be 1,000 feet, because if you think telephone poles are 100 feet apart.
Yeah.
So you only have 10 telephone poles
to
get to Devil's Lake.
Maybe this unused road was like off of one of these more main roads,
Yeah.
closer to Devil's Lake. And like that's where they were kind of, mentioning. And the whole reason I say that is because it looks like that southern area would be like more populated. Just based on that map, you can see there's shopping centers and there's probably some neighborhoods down there. So I'm assuming that someone that was living or working there would be who saw the smoke and then reported it. Because if you're just driving along Route 32, you might not have even noticed that, depending on if it's, further off towards that Devil's Lake area. You could just be driving on your normal commute, not paying attention, but someone who's living there, working there, looking out the window, I feel like they might notice it more than someone just passing through.
I guess it could be either way, because when you're on the highway, you have like nothing impeding your vision. It's just trees and roadway. Whereas if you're at, Great Life Brewing or McDonald's over to the southwest of that, you don't have as clear of a view.
Yeah, that's true. I can see
as somebody driving on the highway. But I guess I can see, like, if you were to walk on the roads, it would take you a 2-mile distance to get from the intersection of 9 West and 32 to get to Devil's Lake. So if you were just cutting a line diagonally between the two, it wouldn't be too far.
Yeah. Okay, so moving right along, as authorities worked to search the area and interview individuals who might have knowledge of what took place on July 25th, 2008, they were also working diligently to identify the remains found. Just 2 weeks after the truck and remains were discovered, investigators were able to positively identify the body in the truck as Michael Kleiman, after they'd taken a DNA sample from his mother to use as a comparison. Now, it was also confirmed pretty early on by authorities that Michael had not died due to the fire, and that authorities were treating the case as a homicide. So because of this, it seems as though Michael had been killed prior to being put in the truck that was later set ablaze. Once an autopsy was completed, the ME was able to determine definitively that Michael had not died as a result of the fire set to his truck, but any information in regards to the state of his body or potentially even his cause of death wouldn't be released until much, much later. There actually wasn't anything official confirmed in terms of this until 2017, nearly 9 years after Michael's body had been found.
So it wasn't even released that he was killed prior to the fire until 2017?
I believe that authorities said, this is a homicide. He was killed before the fire was set to the car. He was killed somehow, some way prior to that, but none of it is...
None of the specifics of his body and how he may have been killed were released up until that point.
Correct. So as time went on and the investigation into Michael Kleiman's murder continued, it was confirmed by investigators that they believed Michael was killed sometime between July 24th and July 25th, 2008, but his exact time of death was not released. It's unclear if investigators aren't entirely sure of what the time of death was, or if they're just giving kind of a rough window of time to keep things close to the chest.
I'm not sure what that would give away. If you're giving, 2-day period.
But why not just say, we're sure he was killed between 3 and 8 p.m. on July 24th? Why would you say there's this obscure window?
Unless I hear that they released it later, a more specific time, then there's a good chance that due to the damage caused to his body through the fire, that they really can't narrow it down more than what they've already released.
So they just don't know it, is what you would assume then if you...
This is probably their best educated guess that based on what they can find through the autopsy, that he was killed on the 24th or the 25th.
Yeah, and I feel like knowing that the truck was set on fire and just considering, you probably didn't see smoke billowing out of the trees for some time and then calling it in, getting authorities there. It had probably been on fire for a little bit of time at least, and you would have to consider the damage that might do to his remains to then make it more difficult to determine a time of death.
Right, I would say so. And then you also think, too, the fire department got there at 2:45, or got the call for this around 2:45.
They arrived on scene at 2:45.
So they arrived on scene at 2:45. Let's say they got the call 2:30. Because if this is an unused road, takes time to respond. The person could have set this around 2 o'clock.
Yeah.
So, if they can narrow down through fire science the time that the fire was started, then they can start working backwards from that to potentially try and work towards when he may have been killed.
Yeah. Even just retracing his steps beforehand, too.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. And there was something else that I do want to mention, and I can't exactly confirm all the pieces to this, but there was a post on Facebook on the Hudson Valley Cold Cases and Missing People page that mentioned that Michael had been last seen on the afternoon of July 24th. And this post also mentions that he was allegedly last seen by his neighbors at his residence on Sundown Road, and that there were phone records that placed him there. But the frustrating thing is that I haven't been able to verify that piece of information literally anywhere else. And I can't figure out who runs this Facebook page, whether it's just like a concerned citizens page or someone with a more official capacity that might have knowledge of like aspects of the case like this. But if this information is true, just looking at where Michael's house was, it was like literally in the middle of the country, like his brother Mark had said. His neighbors weren't all that close to his property, so how could they have seen him? And I don't know, I think it could mean more if you knew like who saw him, when they saw him, if it's accurate that his phone records put him there, what that could mean in terms of like what happened the day prior and then not finding his truck burned until the next day. So I just found it to be interesting, like what they were putting on this Facebook page. And there were like a lot of followers, like a ton of people following this page. So I'm like, is this a concerned citizens page, or is this like, does someone have connections to law enforcement that's running this? Because how would they know that? I will say all the other information on the post was accurate and matched everything from every news source that I was able to find. This was the only little tidbit that was different.
Well, that's the thing that would concern me, is that it's easy if we wanted to start a Facebook page for a specific case that we were working on or that we were trying to help out with. Mm-hmm. You can take all of that information, cross-reference it from these other publications, and when those are taken from something that has actually been put out by police or by the press, mm-hmm. and then you have it on your site there, it's easy for somebody, like I said, to cross-reference it. But when you have a piece of information like this, which is pretty valuable information, but it hasn't come from authorities, or it hasn't been put out in a press release, or it's not in other news publications, mm-hmm. you got to take that with a grain of salt, because you can't tell me that the news wouldn't put out to everybody that he was last seen by his neighbors in the afternoon of the 24th, mm-hmm. when police are struggling to put together some type of time of death, and all they've narrowed down was between the 24th and the 25th. If they had that information and they could say he was killed between, the hours of noontime on the 24th mm-hmm. and 2 o'clock on the 25th, mm-hmm. that takes away, half a day essentially that they have to worry about. So I don't know how credible that information is.
Yeah, the only thing that I would think, though, is like, police for sure have to have his phone records. So they must know the last time that he used his phone, or the last time that it pinged at his house, even if he was at his home when this happened, or if he was driving somewhere else, or if he was somewhere else entirely. You have to think that this is 2008. You can gather that information and say, okay, he was definitely at home at this time. I think it just could hold like a little bit of validity, and that's why I wanted to mention it, is like phone records are something that they would have. It's not like this is totally like pull it out of my ass, like random piece of information that someone's coming forward with. It's like, oh, well, it is 2008. There are phone records. That would make sense. And
do we know he had a cell phone? He's an eccentric guy that lives out in the country, doesn't like modern things. He collects antiques. Why do you believe so much that they can find his phone records if we don't even know if he has a cell phone?
I don't know. I guess I'm just thinking of the day and age. Like,
yeah, it's 2008,
I don't really
but think
know
about
anyone that doesn't have a phone.
Right, but think about it. 2008, right?
Yeah.
Cell phones really only became like prominent 4 years prior to that. And this guy's in his 50s at this time?
Yeah, he was 59.
Do you think that a 59-year-old guy that collects antiques is ready to hop on the next technological bandwagon?
Yeah, maybe not. And I will say there's one other thing, and I didn't really know where to fit this in. And I feel like just now, because you're talking about like kind of how he was, he also liked to frequent swimming holes like in the area. So I feel like you just saying this makes me think like, all right, he is kind of an eccentric guy, and he would do like things that probably weren't typical for the time. Like, how do you don't hear about people in 2008 frequenting swimming holes in freaking mm-hmm. New York.
Right.
Like, so maybe you're right. Maybe this is something to discount, to say like, this might not be accurate. We don't technically know the last sighting of him. Right.
Until you can cross-reference it with something else, or you have somebody that made this claim that went to police and filled out a witness statement or something like that, and you have something else to go with it. We always talk about, we've ruled out doing cases before that we could only verify information via one source, and it was very good information. So we can't hop on that just because we want to.
Yeah. No,
if you can't, even though it sounds credible and it might be coming from a real neighbor or whatever, unless there's one other place that you can find it, or you can talk to somebody and they can say, oh yeah, no, they went to police and they did this, they filled out a witness statement, and we just haven't released that information yet or anything like that because we didn't find it pertinent. It even though it's good information to have, it wouldn't have furthered our investigation to release that publicly. So maybe that's why it hasn't been released.
Yeah.
But I would say if he did have a cell phone, I'm sure police were trying to do cell phone pings. They're not always super accurate. They're not accurate nowadays.
Yeah, that's
so
true.
To say how accurate they would have been in 2008, a ping could have, said that somebody was in a 5-mile radius.
Yeah. When I think about these things, especially with the 2000s and like the way life is now, it feels like when you talk about 1970, that feels 30 years ago.
1990 sounds like 10 years ago to me.
Exactly. But 2008 was actually 14 years ago. So when you think about it, it's like, oh shit, all right, he was 59 and that was a long time ago. You're right. I mean, it is definitely a good possibility he didn't have a cell phone, and that like didn't even cross my mind.
Yeah, and you want to think too, like, I feel as though time has passed so much faster now that we have social media, we have the internet, we have all these things at our fingertips. YouTube only came out in 2005. The iPhone came out, 2008 maybe? I think the first iPhone came out.
Wow,
but
that's crazy.
Every time you think about a phone, you're like, man, I've had an iPhone forever. But no, you haven't. It only came out in 2008. So it's like we think that these things have been around forever because we've been using them for the past, for me, almost 2 decades now.
Yeah.
But at this time, 2008, that was just when things were getting started. And
I think that's probably when I got my first cell phone, if I really think about it and I think back. So
right. Well, I graduated in 2005.
Mm-hmm.
And I think at the time of my graduation, I had that blue and black flipped Nextel. Ryan still had the block Nokia.
That's
with
what
Snake
I had.
on
That
it.
was my first phone. Yeah.
So, I mean, we're talking 2004, 2005. People are still having like old school phones that people would laugh at nowadays.
Mm-hmm.
The Razor was probably huge back then.
So
the Sidekick was like the thing.
Yeah. I bet you Michael Kleiman did not have an iPhone the year it came out. So I'll give you that one. That one is yours for the taking.
All right.
Okay, so at this point in the investigation, authorities also believed that Michael was killed before his car was even driven to where it was discovered near Devil's Lake. So to me, that seems like Michael was murdered somewhere, not sure where, but then placed in his own car and driven to the scene. Then you would assume that the perpetrators would have gotten out of the car and then someone else must have driven whoever did this out of the area, because how else would this person or persons responsible have gotten away from the scene unless they were like a getaway driver, right?
That, or could he have been killed in his car? Could it have been a carjacking type deal?
Yeah, but you have to think there's got to be more than one person here. There has to be more than one person involved, because even if he was killed in his car, I highly doubt he was killed in his car in this place, especially if authorities are thinking his car was driven there.
No, I'm not saying that he was killed in his car in this place, but say carjacking or something.
Yeah.
Or say he picks up some guy on the side of the road that was hitchhiking.
Yeah.
And then this guy ends up killing him. He tries to carjack him. He pulls a gun on him or whatever. Until we know the cause of death, I'm hesitant to try and speculate more on where he could have been killed, how he ended up where he was, how many people were involved. I think that's really important information because, like last week's episode, when Lila was shot in the right side of her head, she wasn't in the passenger seat of a car. These are important factors that you need to have before you can start, in my opinion anyway, piecing together where could it have happened, how did it happen, how many people were involved.
So the thing that I question, though, is if he's driven to this spot, how would anyone get away? On foot?
Potentially.
I mean, I just feel like that's not really likely.
Not likely, but...
Possible.
Possible.
All right, let's keep going.
I want to know more about...
I'm going to give you more. We'll keep going.
All right.
So, as of 2009, approximately a year after Michael had been killed, the police chief at the time stated for the Poughkeepsie Journal, quote, "We've spoken to thousands of people and we've followed up on hundreds of tips. We're continuously moving around and talking to people. We're asking people to share any information they may have. Even if it doesn't seem important to them, it may be important for us, end quote. Also around this same time, in 2009, authorities went on to release some other little tidbits of information to the public, like the fact that investigators were able to gather some form of forensic evidence from the scene. But of course, they can't and won't say what those pieces of evidence were. Chief Watzka also told the Poughkeepsie Journal, quote, "I can't get into the specifics of what was recovered and sent to the state police lab, but we have many items that were sent and evaluated and some that are being looked at as we speak," end quote. And I just wonder, do police sometimes say things like this in hopes that whoever's responsible is going to come forward because they're scared of how much forensic evidence authorities might have? Do they actually think that this is going to maybe make someone come forward more willingly? Because I feel like in so many cases we hear about investigators saying, we have this, we have that, we have so much forensic evidence, but then you hear nothing about results.
So your base question there is, why would they release this? What are they trying to do by releasing the information that they have forensic evidence that they've located from the scene?
Yeah, what does that do for their case?
So say they have 3 people of interest.
Mm-hmm.
Once they release that information, they're keeping an eye on them. Mm-hmm. They want to see how their movements have changed. It's been over a year since the murder.
Okay.
They see how these people may have been acting for all this time. Then say you release this information and one of the person of interest is like, I'm going to the bank, I'm getting a bunch of money, they're getting ready to leave and flee the area.
Okay, yep.
So if you have people in mind that you believe may be involved in this, by releasing that information, you get to see how they react to it.
Okay, that's a really cool take. That's not exactly what I was thinking, because I'm like, what's the point of saying ooh, we have so much, but then you don't hear about results? What does that do for you?
If they think it's a local person that's still in the area and they've had their eye on them, now they get to see how they react once they find out that, oh shit, police might be onto me.
Okay, all right, very cool. Now, something else that seemed to be going on at the time was the rumor mill.
I actually had a question, and I don't know if it'll fit here.
Okay.
But I wonder if the rumor mill is going to get into it.
Okay.
So, this is me trying to generate a profile. I don't know a whole lot about Michael, but he's a single man. He's eccentric. He's in his 50s. He lives alone. He likes to collect antiques. Is he gay?
Well,
that's just me generating a profile from it.
Yeah.
From dealing with people that I deal with a lot of different types of people. And if I were to try to put something together for him, even without needing the rumor mill, that's one of the things that I would have thought about.
I want you to finish listening to all the information I've compiled for you, and we will come to a conclusion, I promise.
Well, that tells me enough. So, continue.
Continue listening. Thank you. So, like in many cases we cover on this show, there was a lot of conjecture surrounding Michael's case and, more specifically, what took place prior to his body being put in the truck, as well as the state of his body. The number one rumor was that Michael had been dismembered. And remember, after the autopsy was done, authorities weren't releasing his cause of death, so no one really officially knew anything. There was an article published in the Daily Freeman regarding what police, specifically the chief at the time, Paul Watzka, would and would not comment on in terms of the condition of Michael's body. The passage reads, quote, Watzka said police on Friday received a medical report they were waiting for on the condition of the body, but he would not divulge the contents of the report. He also declined again to comment on reports that parts of the man's body were missing when firefighters discovered it. I'm not going to get into any of these sensationalist reports about the head, the arms, or whatever, the chief said. His only description of the body was that it had been burned beyond recognition, end quote.
Just another thing as far as fire science goes and breaking down how the fire started from an investigative standpoint that could help with police is what type of accelerant was used to start the fire. Because if this guy was burned beyond recognition, was he doused in gasoline and lit on fire?
Yep.
Or was the car lit on fire and he was inside of it?
Yeah, I think that would be very telling to know.
I would have to assume that he was set on fire inside the vehicle.
And then the car obviously caught fire.
Went up in flames from then.
Okay. So going back to the dismemberment, I think what the chief was saying at the time could kind of mean one of two things. Either this is totally sensationalized and people are perpetuating things that had been rumored around town and it's not accurate information at all. Or some or all of what's rumored is true, and police are trying to not really confirm any aspects of it, to not let out too much information to then potentially harm their investigation.
I think it could go either way. I think that there's probably some truth to the sensationalism.
Okay.
Maybe people are saying, oh, his head was missing, he was dismembered, but there's probably some truth to the rumors. Because if it was totally not true, he very well could have said, those are rumors, they are absolutely not true. We're not going to release the state of his body outside of being burned beyond recognition, but enough with these sensationalist stories. We're trying to find a killer here. A man was murdered.
Yep.
If you have valid information you want to give us, come forward with it, but like he could have shut it down like that. So I'm going to assume that there's probably some truth to what he's trying to brush off.
Well, I'm not going to leave you in the dark for too much longer. So let's fast forward a bit to the current investigation, as things really didn't seem to progress much from 2009 until about 2017. Now, at this point, the Ulster County PD, the Ulster County DA's office, and the State Police Troop F Major Crimes Unit are all involved in the investigation. Also, Detective Berardi, who had taken over the case from the beginning, had actually been promoted to Chief of Ulster County PD, and he'd handed over the lead on the case to Detective Reevey. But Berardi was still pretty heavily involved in the case, even though he was now chief. So, like I said earlier on in the episode, the state of Michael's body wouldn't be revealed until 2017. But Michael's brother Mark had mentioned that word, dismembered, in an article back in 2009, but the chief would never confirm or deny the accuracy of that statement back then. However, in 2017, Mark also mentioned in another article with the Daily Freeman that his brother had been found, quote, decapitated and with no hands, end quote. And now at this point, it seems as though that was confirmed by police, because the write-up on Michael's case on the New York State Police's website even now states that Michael had been, quote, disarticulated, which the official definition of disarticulation is, quote, to be disjointed.
So like I was saying, there had to be some truth. Decapitated, you could think, head gone, arms gone, legs gone, stuff like that, where it's just all the body parts are everywhere.
Yeah.
Versus decapitated and his hands removed.
Yeah.
What are the easiest ways to identify a body?
Fingerprints, dental records.
Right? And potentially a face.
But then why would you put him in his own car? Of course, they're initially going to think that it's him. My thought was more along the lines of hiding evidence. Scratching someone, biting someone, maybe potentially even a bullet wound or a bullet still lodged in his head. Then you couldn't match it back to the ballistics of a specific gun. You couldn't get DNA from under his fingernails. Those were the kinds of things that I was thinking.
I think they both go hand in hand. So from one aspect, it impeded the investigation by delaying how fast they could identify the murdered party.
Yeah.
Because they had to do the DNA test, which took a couple weeks, and then that came back. But also, what you said is absolutely possible, because DNA under fingernails, like you said, bite marks, what kind of damage was done to the head? Was the head caved in from blunt force trauma, or was he shot in the head? It is hiding evidence. It's impeding the investigation in multiple ways by doing that. You're slowing down how fast you can identify the person, and you're hiding tons of evidence.
Even if you're not meaning to, even though I feel like that's probably why, in one way or another, it's being impeded, regardless.
And just a side note before we continue, whoever did this is fucked up.
Oh my God, horrible.
This is either like a real serious criminal, or he got in with the wrong people and like somebody came after him.
Yeah.
Because you don't behead somebody and chop off their hands and then set them on fire in their own car.
It's horrifying.
Right. So it's somebody either really had to hide something, somebody was really worried about something, or you got in bed with the wrong people.
Or they're fucking deranged.
Yeah. But then I wonder, where is the head and where are the hands?
I wonder the same thing. And before we move forward, I wanted to mention something, and I want to ask you about it too, because I was really curious about this as I was researching. So all of these articles, like literally every single one, mention Michael's height and weight. And I feel like you see like a descriptor of people so much more often in a missing persons case. Like so-and-so was 5'6", 180 pounds, had a tattoo, had ear piercings, had all this. I'm like, spieling off all the things in Diane Wolf because that's what's in my head.
Yeah.
But I feel like you see that more to identify someone. But in all these articles, it's like Michael was 6'2" and 230 pounds.
Mm-hmm.
Why?
Probably trying to narrow down who else may have seen him. Trying to narrow down the time of death, see if anybody saw him out and about with his killer.
Yeah.
More or less trying to put together a timeline, I think, to say, hey, this is Michael, this is how tall he was, this, that, and the other thing. Just like you said, when you put it out for missing persons, they have this great description because they're trying to find somebody.
Yeah.
It's the same vein here. They're trying to find him.
With somebody?
They're trying to find where he was.
Yeah, okay.
They're trying to retrace his steps. Mm-hmm. So if they put out this great description, you know, sure, a picture is one thing, but if I look at a picture of him when he's sitting down, I might think that he's 5'4", whereas if he's, 6 feet,
yeah,
and I saw him walking around with somebody, it may trigger a memory or something. I think it's just authorities are really trying to put out all the information about him to try and see if anybody saw him at any point with anybody. Okay,
so I was wondering too, though, could that lend to the idea of who could have done this too, to say he was 6'2" and 230 pounds. He could hold his own.
Potentially.
Yeah, because he wasn't a small guy. He wasn't a skinny mini,
No, he lived on a farm area. I don't know if he did farmhand type work.
Yeah, I'm not sure about that, but I don't know. I didn't know if it could lend credence to that, I guess, but.
I mean, it could. It could say this guy was 6'2", 230 pounds. He was probably killed by multiple people. He probably would have been able to handle his own if one person had attacked him. Either he was taken by surprise or multiple people were involved.
Yeah, okay.
Probably something like that. But also I think it's also to try and retrace the steps, to try and figure out if anybody saw him anywhere.
That makes perfect sense as to why. Okay, so I've been keeping something from you that was spoiled by reporters pretty early on in the investigation, but I didn't want to give this aspect of the case away until you had more information to go off of. So, back in 2008, there was an article published in the Hudson Valley One that mentions that sometime after Michael's body had been found and it was confirmed that the remains did belong to him, authorities had reached out to the LGBTQ centers of the Hudson Valley. Now, just based on how this is reported on, I feel like authorities didn't really want this piece of their investigation to get out. Because after they'd reached out to this LGBTQ center, I guess employees of the center had a full-on freak out and sent out some mass email warning people that there was some anti-gay killer on the loose. But then authorities later put out a statement saying something along the lines of, oh, we're just covering all our bases. There's no indication that this was a hate crime. But of course, this little piece of information then made people wonder if Michael had been gay and if this might have been the reason he was killed. Why else would authorities be reaching out to this particular LGBTQ center? And again, in 2017, when all this other information that had come out about the dismemberment, and Mark had mentioned all of that to the media, he did also confirm that Michael was gay, and he believed that his brother's murder may have actually been a hate crime.
I think it could possibly be a hate crime. I think that the reason behind police not wanting to let that information out is multifaceted.
Yeah.
It's the stigmatization of the LGBTQ community. And if, you have 100% of people interested in trying to find this person's killer, and then it comes out that this guy was gay, it's bad to say, but there are people that would be like, oh, I don't care about that anymore.
Yeah.
So it's much like when we talked about New Bedford Highway serial killer.
Yep.
All of the females involved were involved in sex work.
Yep.
Once you put that out there, there's this stigmatization of these people oh, they're lesser than.
Yeah.
So I think that police didn't want to put it out there because they didn't want any biases to be held against it. I think that they didn't want the information to get out there because they didn't want the mass hysteria coming out of that community saying, hey, this is probably a hate crime.
Yeah.
And I think that they didn't want it to get out because whoever was involved may still be from the area. And then by them knowing that the police are onto
that community, yep,
they may be linked to the murder sooner than later.
Yeah.
And it may have allowed them to escape faster.
That's very true. Those are all great points.
There's a lot of things around there.
Yeah. And I do just want to say, too, in that same Daily Freeman article that Mark, Michael's brother, had, given interviews for, he did say that he, quote, speculated that hate or some other passion or insanity certainly was part of the killer's motive, end quote. And I totally agree with him there. Like, whoever did this was a very angry and messed up individual, because this is brutal.
When you just read that quote to me, it made me think back to, geez, how long ago now? Do you remember the guy on bath salts in Florida that was eating the guy's face?
Yes.
So when you think about like insanity and stuff like that, could it be a drug-induced thing?
Maybe, yeah.
That made somebody go fucking crazy.
Maybe.
But then they also managed to, kill this guy, set him on fire, dump the vehicle out in the woods.
To me, it doesn't necessarily seem like pre-planned, but like this person knew or had help with, shit, what the fuck did I just do?
Mm-hmm.
Now I need to clean it up in the best way I possibly can to not get caught, or can so-and-so help me clean this up in the best way to not get caught?
So back to the whole hate crime portion of it.
Yeah.
In order for me to get on board with that, whereas of course it's a possibility. I mean, we always talk about that when you're speculating. You need to make sure that you're doing things, or you're coming up with ideas that are based in reality, that you have other aspects of evidence that you can kind of
corroborate,
lean on, to say this is probably going in this direction. But what other evidence do you have to link it to outside of unwarranted hate towards a particular group?
It does not seem like there's really much, and authorities haven't really said a lot about it. It seems like they wanted to keep that aspect kind of hush-hush, and I'm not knocking the police for that at all. Like what you said, it did seem multifaceted, their reasoning for not wanting that to get out. But I also think what they didn't want to get out was like the hysterical part of it, of saying like,
absolutely,
there's this anti-gay killer. Oh my God, there's this mass email that sent out all this. I think that was like, they're just trying to do their due diligence and be as on the ball as they can with this investigation. And then unfortunately, them being proactive turned into this kind of mass hysteria thing, which is almost a little bit embarrassing.
Well, you have to think that when you approach like a marginalized community and say, hey, somebody that was a part of your community was just murdered, dismembered, and set on fire.
Yeah.
How can they not
freak out
and say, holy shit, people are coming after us?
Absolutely. I mean, I totally get that, but I just can understand both sides of it to say like, wow, the police must have been like, shit.
Yeah.
Should we have done this more discreetly so that people didn't worry? But of course, hindsight's 20/20. No matter what, like
you have to ask the questions at the end of the day.
Yeah.
So you can't avoid it. You just try to tiptoe around it the best you can. And if word ends up getting out, you had to ask the questions.
Yep. No, it makes perfect sense.
But what I was saying as far as like what other evidence do they have to lean on in order to go towards that hate crime portion? I mean, the guy liked antiquing. Could he have gone into some type of very valuable antique that somebody wanted? Like, that's what I'm saying.
A Fabergé egg.
A Fabergé egg, right? So it's like, what other evidence do you have to lean on? Did it happen to other people in that community? Or because other than that, you can just take every facet of this guy's life and say, oh, well, he could have did this in his life, and maybe that was there.
Yeah.
But there's nothing saying that, oh, yeah, it was an antique.
I just think it was,
antique, you know?
Yeah, I just think it was one of those things where it was just so brutal. It was so much anger, so much hatred, so much trying to cover it all up. Like, of course, people are going to look at that and they're going to say, maybe that is the reason. But you can look at any case and you, like you just said, take any little aspect of their life to say like, oh, he lived in the country. Did he have some sort of feud like everybody does in Yellowstone over land or something stupid, you know?
Right.
There could be things like that. So it's not clear. Authorities had said, that whatever they were saying in that like press release to be like, there's no indication that this was a hate crime. So like, if there is any indication, we don't know it.
Well, I don't think that they could come out and say that there was no indication that it's a hate crime if there was any indication that there was a hate crime.
Yeah,
because
exactly.
if they came out and they said that, and all of a sudden all these people from the fucking LGBT community are turning up beheaded and with no hands and burnt to death, they're up fucking Schitt's Creek. So I would have to say that if they're coming out and saying that there is no other evidence to imply that this was a hate crime,
that it
probably wasn't.
Yeah.
And they must have something else, something more concrete, something more tangible to lead them in the direction of where it actually manifested from.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. So now that Mark had made it publicly known that his brother was gay, journalists definitely wanted a comment from authorities regarding that fact and if the reason for Michael's murder was because of his sexual orientation. But just like most things in this case, authorities weren't releasing much. And like I just said, they refused to comment on if his sexual orientation was the perpetrator's motive. But Chief Berardi did respond with some other information regarding the investigation and told the Daily Freeman, quote, Our main thing is we're still looking for connections between Kerhonkson, where he lived, and East Kingston, where the body was found. There's somebody that knows, end quote.
I find it interesting that investigators are honing in on his home, or his hometown, or not even his hometown, the town in which he lived.
Yep.
And where his body was found.
So I feel like I do this a lot in these episodes, but I dig really deep into public records and like people's houses and where they lived and like all of that stuff. I'm very intrigued by where people choose to live. And I think a lot of times that can mean something in terms of a case. And I think that's kind of, in a way, what the detectives are insinuating here. And I think the fact that he lived in the country, that he lived on this property by himself, like if you look at the link that I sent you, unfortunately, there's no pictures of his house online, but you can see like the Google Street View. It's a little run down now, but I don't know what it looked like back in 2008, but It's like this big barn garage area. Like it's definitely secluded. So that just brought me back to kind of thinking about that Facebook post I mentioned and like him maybe being seen at his house and if his phone records did really put him there and if something happened at his home. Because if they're hung up on his home and then like the distance from his home to where he was found, like did they have connections to both places? What does his home mean? Like I feel like it could mean more.
I suppose it could, especially if they knew that somebody else was at his home with him. If they had tire tracks, if his home was in disarray.
Yeah. I mean, his neighbor is like literally, you can see his neighbors are all across the street from him, but like on his side of the street where his property is, it looks like he had a fair amount of land and there don't seem to be neighbors on either side of him. So I'm guessing if anybody saw him, it had to be the neighbor across the street. But he is still relatively secluded on his own land. So if something happened there, I don't know how much someone might see.
Well, if they're really targeting the area in which he lived, you would probably assume that there must be something with the house. So I'm wondering if they found evidence inside the house that they haven't released.
Maybe that there was a struggle or something like that.
Right, like I was saying, his house was in disarray, or they had, it doesn't look like there's a great driveway. It might have been like a dirt driveway or something of that nature, and maybe there were tire tracks left, or maybe there was a vehicle that one of the neighbors saw in the driveway that didn't belong to him.
That's something to consider. So then, like, what do neighbors know?
What do neighbors know, but also, I don't know, this is like the boonies. What? Would he have met somebody? Why would somebody go out here unless they were going out to see him? Like, why would somebody end up at his house if something did happen there, unless he invited them, unless he was followed for some reason, which we have no reason to really believe that, but let's just say he was having people over, like he met somebody and he was having them over for whatever reason.
Yeah.
Maybe something stems from there.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing.
Maybe they robbed him.
I mean, maybe, but I think that's the thing that's so interesting and different about this case is the fact that I said it in the beginning, like there's no indication that anybody was worried about him. No one was worried that he either wasn't at work or he wasn't at a scheduled appointment or he wasn't reported missing. Just all of a sudden this call comes in and then his loved ones are finding out that he's potentially murdered.
Well, I don't know why, but I get this weird feeling on this case where this may have happened because of some type of sexual encounter. Okay. I don't know why, but I just get that feeling where maybe he met someone, he drove them back to his house, or they followed him back to his house, and something happened there. And then just to go back to the hate crime, maybe they knew he was gay and they purposely set up some type of sting operation to get him at his house alone and then to kill him and rob him because they didn't like him, or they didn't like the fact that he was gay. Maybe something like that. That's definitely a possibility. But I just have this weird feeling where, he's a single guy, he's in his 50s, he's eccentric, he doesn't have a lot of friends, but he's friendly with everybody type thing. I just think that this was some type of encounter where he was taken off guard.
Yeah.
He thought that he was befriending someone, or that the person that ended up killing him, had no ill intentions,
Yep.
and then he was taken advantage of. If it was a sexual encounter and they got to his house and then they killed him and they robbed him, who knows what they might have taken from the house. Maybe that's the big connection. Between the place of where he lived and where the body was found. And maybe the person or the people that were involved in killing him were from East Kingston. Mm-hmm. And that's the connection between Kerhonkson.
There's no T in the end. Kerhonkson.
Kerhonkson and
East Kingston.
East Kingston.
Yeah, I mean, maybe.
I don't know. I just get that weird feeling where that it was like, because nobody's worried about him. Mm-hmm. It doesn't seem like he has any enemies.
Nope, and that's been said. No enemies at all. He was very well liked. Even though he kept to himself, he was still personable, but didn't have like this large group of friends or anything like that.
Mm-hmm. I don't know. I just get that weird feeling that this might have stemmed from maybe not a sexual encounter, but some type of friendly encounter where he was taken by surprise, thinking that this person had no, malintent for him.
Yeah.
And then this is what happened.
I agree. So something else I just wanted to mention too when I was researching this case is that you can just tell that the detectives working it are not going to let it go, and they truly care about finding the person or persons responsible, and they continue to look at the case on a regular basis. The Daily Freeman reported, quote, Berardi said Town of Ulster detectives meet with the state police on a weekly basis regarding the case and continue to canvass Kleiman's Kerhonkson neighborhood, hoping to find people who we might have missed in initial interviews, end quote.
How long did he live in his house before he was murdered?
He bought it in 1992, so he'd been there for a while.
Okay, so he's not like a new person to the area.
Nope. Now, as of today, Michael's exact cause of death has not been released. We do know that there seems to be some validity to the fact that he was in some way disarticulated, and it seems as though it was his hands and head that were removed. But other than that, it's unclear exactly how Michael was killed. I think there's probably a reason for that. I think he was killed in whatever way, and then his body parts removed, whether that be to hide evidence or something else, but I don't think that the disarticulation was his cause of death. But that's just my opinion.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I think, again, just to go back to it, it was either done to hide evidence or impede the investigation into maybe not being able to identify the person who was killed. Mm-hmm. And something else that just popped into my head when thinking about the disarticulation is I wonder if investigators have been able to narrow down how he was disarticulated. Mm-hmm. Was it with an axe? Was it with a saw? Was it with a power tool?
Yeah, to
things
lead.
Like that, to try and narrow down a little bit more in the investigation, or at least to have more answers. Because if he lived on a farm, did he chop his own firewood, and was there an axe there?
I would assume the Emmy probably.
Well, you would know if it's like if it's a clean cut from like a power tool.
Yep.
If it's a hack job, to be blunt about it.
Or if it's more precise, like a surgical type.
Mm-hmm. Like you could tell if something was sawed back and forth versus something chopped and broken versus something with like a power tool, like a sawzall or something like that.
I just wonder, though, if the fire could have damaged that.
I don't think it would have damaged the bone.
Oh, true. Okay,
That's really where you would be able to see it most, I think. Yep. Because, yes, he was burned very heavily. Mm-hmm. So the flesh on his body would have been seriously damaged and cauterized, and probably wouldn't be able to tell that much. But based on, when you're chopping through bone, there's going to be fragments of it that are broken off, chipped. That's really where you're going to be able to tell or have an idea of what type of item was used in that act.
This is why I don't do cases like this, because it's just like,
it
gives me like...
There's a lot of uncomfortable questions that need to be asked in a case like this.
It's hard, and it's like just knowing what was done to him and to like try and imagine that. Like it's just so horrifying, and like whoever did this is just some sort of insane monster.
Yeah, absolutely. It's tough. I assume it's probably very tough for people that are just listening to episodes like this to know that things like this happen, but unless you're in a profession where you become desensitized to things, it's never going to be easy. Like you could talk about it all you want, but you're always going to have those weird thoughts unless, like I said, you're in that profession where you kind of get desensitized to stuff and you're just there to ask the questions and to get the answers and to move forward.
Yeah, I think no matter what, at the end of the day, as tough as it is to say and talk about, Michael deserves answers.
Oh, absolutely.
Michael's family deserves answers, so we're going to talk about it.
And the questions have to be asked. And Maybe,
that's how you get to the bottom of it.
Right. And maybe you ask a question that somebody else didn't, or somebody hears it and ends up triggering a memory in their head or something.
Yeah. So as of June 2022, this is kind of where the investigation stands. There haven't been too many update articles, and there hasn't really been any additional information released in the case either. So what I've told you so far is pretty much all we have to go off of. Other than one really huge other thing that police have asked specifically of the public. I think it's very important for you to know the next few pieces of information, or I guess really questions, that police have asked and that kind of coincide with the individuals they're interested in speaking to in regards to Michael's case. So investigators mentioned that the reason they wanted to ask the public for this specific assistance with these few things is because, quote, people's lives have changed since then. We wanted to try to generate some discussion about this case, and maybe somebody who couldn't or wouldn't talk to us at the time will come forward, end quote. Now, there are 5 or 6, I guess, main pieces of information that have been discussed and are pretty much in every single article you can find on this case. So first, authorities specifically want to know if you had a family member or friend that was out of work unexpectedly or had missed scheduled appointments around the time of Michael's murder. Second, they want to know if anyone out there knew someone that had abruptly left the area after Michael's murder, whether that be for a short time or more permanently. Third, they want to know if you had a friend or family member that used alcohol or drugs more than usual around the time of Michael's murder. Fourth, they want to know if anyone close to you had a, quote, abnormal interest in the media coverage on Michael's case. And fifth, and what I believe to be the most intriguing and potentially most important aspect to what authorities are interested in knowing, is if you had a friend or family member that may have, quote, unknowingly provided the killer or killers with a ride or transportation away from the East Kingston or Ulster Business District between 1 p.m. and 4 p.m. on the day Michael's body was discovered. That was a lot.
It's a lot when you put it like that.
Yeah.
But yes, those are very valid questions. You take the questions or the answers that you're seeking and you try to create the dumbest down questions that you can just put out to a large blanket of people.
Yeah.
And those are all awesome questions.
Yeah.
That last one, though,
yes,
is really important because did somebody pick up a hitchhiker? Did somebody say they were broken down and they needed a ride? People will remember picking somebody up.
Yep.
More so than, oh, somebody was out sick. Oh, somebody was drinking. This, that, or the other thing. Like, that is an actual action that took place as opposed to an observation.
Yeah.
So that sticks out in your memory a lot better, a lot easier.
So because I knew about that, and we were talking before about the car being there and like having a getaway driver, essentially. What you were saying about a hitchhiker, someone picking up a hitchhiker or something like that, like someone trying to get away on foot, totally possible. But also in my mind, I wonder if like someone did this and they called up their friend and they were like, hey, Joe Schmo, I need a ride. Can you come get me? And then technically they're an unknowing getaway driver and an unknowing participant in what just occurred.
Yes, I think that word unknowingly is very important in that question. Because like you said, somebody called, said they needed a ride. Like, oh yeah, you needed a ride, you broke down, whatever.
Yeah.
But then when you're saying, this person asked for a ride and they asked for a ride in this area on the day that this guy's body was found. And
he was doing a lot of drugs.
Yeah.
And he missed work that one time.
And then start piecing it all together.
Yeah. But then you have to think too, in that exact like quote, it says unknowingly provided the killer or killers. So I still wonder, are they just saying that as a blanket thing? Or is it like they know that there might be more than one?
I don't think it's...
I don't know. You have to think about it. Like he was not a large dude by any means, but like he wasn't a scrawny guy. Like he could handle his own. So like I just keep going back to that. Like why was that put in all these articles? Why are all these people talking about his size? Does it have to do with if there's more than one? You see the word persons or persons, killer or killers constantly throughout all of this. Is that like...
I think it's to not exclude.
Okay, yeah.
Because if you say the killer, people are only on the lookout for one person. If you say the killers, people are on the lookout for multiple people. If you say the killer or killers, it could be a single person, it could be multiple people. If they said, oh, you know someone or may have yourself unknowingly given the killers a ride. Like, no, it was just my friend Mike that I gave a ride to.
Yeah.
But no, it was Mike and Jeff that I gave a ride to.
Yeah.
Or if they said the killer a ride and you picked up Mike and Jeff together.
Yeah.
It's like, I think it's just to not exclude.
Yeah.
They might not have enough information to say whether or not it is one or multiple people, but I think it's just more or less to not exclude.
No, that makes
anything.
sense. I think sometimes I just like dig into things when there's like nothing else to freaking go on. And I'm like, I don't have a suspect. I don't have a cause of death. I don't have any of this at my disposal. So it's like, what little things can I piece together to try and like even just ask questions that people might not have asked before that could, lead them some way.
No, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think that depending on the person that's putting out the press conference, they very well could have just said killer. If it was in a different jurisdiction and a different person putting out the press conference. Or they could have just said killers. It depends on who's putting it out there, and it depends on how deliberate that statement is.
Yeah.
Because if somebody had put out the statement and said the killer, that could be interpreted multiple ways. They know it's one person, or they fucked up and they said killer when they don't know it's more than one person.
Yeah.
So that to say killer or killers, I think it's more just to not lead anybody in one direction over another. It's just to say it could have been.
I think that's a really great point. Yeah. So something I wouldn't have thought about. And so before I had mentioned that there were 5 or 6 things that authorities had mentioned. So I ended at 5. We have one more here. And this has to do with some of Michael's personal belongings. And authorities want to know if someone you knew might have had them or gave them to someone or maybe even sold them. It's reported that Michael had a silver ring with a blue stone in its setting, which I will have a photo of on both our website and our socials of this particular piece of jewelry. He also had an older style Rolex watch, a small diamond earring, and a horseshoe-shaped silver pinky ring. All of these pieces of jewelry were reportedly Michael's, and it seems as though they were verified as being his, but they have never been found. They were not in his house, nor on his person, and not in his truck. So, did whoever did this take these pieces of jewelry and sell them? Give them to someone? Keep them as trophies? Who knows? But I think it's important to know what these items were in case maybe you knew someone that displayed any of these previously mentioned 5 questions, I guess, that police had, and then you can piece these things together to say, hey, maybe this means something, and then call authorities.
Yeah, I could see that. When I think of like dismembering or disarticulation, I always think of like cartels.
Okay, yeah.
Just because of like the type of stuff I've watched
like
on
Ozark.
TV. Ozark, Narcos, stuff like that.
Yeah.
So in that aspect, like if they did this just to get rid of evidence and shit, wherever his head and hands are, all of that stuff probably is.
Because it is a watch, rings, and earrings.
Or the only thing that I could think would be stolen if it was like an organized crime thing or whatever, would be the Rolex, because that's like...
worth something?
These other items might be worth something too, but I think that a Rolex is a little bit less identifiable.
Yeah.
Versus...
I mean, a horseshoe-shaped pinky ring.
It takes a certain type of person to wear a horseshoe-shaped pinky ring versus a Rolex. The whole thing with like the cartel and wherever his head and hands may be, so may be the items or personal belongings. The other side to that coin is if this was a robbery and a murder and stuff like that, somebody very well could have done this and stolen all of those items. And if it's a robbery, they're doing it for money,
so
most likely.
Sell them.
So
yeah. Now, it's also been mentioned that authorities believe that whoever did this definitely had to have told someone what they did. There's no way they would keep their mouths shut for this long without at least telling someone. I have a feeling investigators know more than they're letting on to the public, and they're asking these specific questions because they can't quite get to the bottom of it without your help. Authorities have even mentioned persons of interest that they've had in the past as well. Detective Reevy stated, quote, "There have never been any suspects. There have been people of interest. Some of those have been cleared, and some we can't clear, end quote. It's completely unclear who these potential persons of interest are or were, but I think whoever they can't clear is who they want to know more about and why they're asking the public those questions.
It's funny how our brains go totally different ways, but now after just hearing that and like reflecting on what we talked about through the case and the hate crime and the LGBTQ community and them being worried about stuff, and could that have been a link into why he was murdered?
Mm-hmm.
And then authorities saying whoever did this couldn't have kept their mouth shut.
Yeah.
I think of like white supremacists and skinheads, and like after they do something fucked up, they brag about it and they tell people about it, and they can't keep their mouth shut because it's almost like they wear it they wear the terrible shit that they do as a badge of honor type thing. So now I'm like second guessing, okay, could it have actually been linked to some type of hate crime? And maybe that's why they're saying that the person who did this can't keep their mouth shut, because they are part of some type of, group or community that has a particular MO.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's totally possible. And I was literally just going to ask you too, like, question right here. Now that you have all this information at your disposal, what do you think?
I'm more inclined to believe that it could have possibly been a hate crime now. More so than earlier when we were talking about the statements that were released saying, oh no, don't worry about it. It doesn't seem like there's any type of link here.
Yeah.
Maybe there's no solidified link because they haven't had a suspect yet. They've only had people of interest.
Yeah.
So when somebody's a suspect and then you're going to go forward with charges, then maybe they're going to say, oh yeah, there's a link here now.
Or we found a link.
We found a link, right.
Yeah.
So I don't know. It definitely could be. If his brother Mark was of the opinion that it could have been, I wouldn't discount it totally. And then you want to think of the brutality of what happened.
That's exactly what I was going to say next. Like, this is a horrific way to kill somebody.
Yeah.
Obviously, any of the murders that we cover, it's horrible, but there is just something so awful about this one.
Right. And the despicableness of this crime goes levels higher because it's not like he was shot in the head and then the car was set on fire to try and get rid of evidence. He was killed somehow, dismembered, and then lit on fire.
Yeah.
So there are multiple steps of, depravity in this where not only did they kill someone, but then they disarticulated them and then they set the body on fire. It's like there has to be some real anger, hatred, resentment behind or inside of whoever it was that did this.
And that's why that brings me along the lines of thinking it might be a hate crime, because he had no enemies. He was a nice guy. I mean, come on. He worked with adolescents and kids at the psychiatric hospital. His work fulfilled him. He was a happy guy, a nice guy.
That's why I'm thinking when I had said along the lines of like maybe this was a sting type thing and a sexual encounter. Whoever did this, maybe they set him up into thinking that, oh, we're going to go back to your house, we're going to do whatever, and then pulled this shit because they knew he was gay.
Maybe.
So it could have been some guy posing as somebody that was interested in him.
Yeah. And
then it was like a targeted thing, like with gangs. In order to join a gang, like a legit gang, you have to do fucked up shit. So they test you.
Yeah.
This could have been a test to get into a gang. You need to go after this.
Up, but I can see it,
right.
Yeah.
You need to go after this guy. He's gay. We don't like him. You gotta kill him, prove that you killed him by bringing back head and hands.
Yep.
And then get rid of the body. So I think it was targeted probably because of his lifestyle, as terrible as that is. And the more I'm thinking about it, I'm 50-50 on could be a hate crime. I think that he was targeted for a reason.
Absolutely, yeah.
Could be a hate crime, or could be somebody having to fulfill some type of heinous act to get into a gang.
Yeah. It's all just real fucked up.
Yeah, it absolutely is.
I also sent you another picture of him with his mom, which it's really sad. His mom, obviously, like, he was close with her. He went and stayed at her house on the weekends when he worked his double shifts. And she passed away 6 months after he was killed. And his Michael's brother, Mark, believes that she, like, essentially died of a broken heart.
Yeah, it happens more often than you would think.
Ugh, it's just so sad.
It is.
All of Michael's family is deceased except for his older brother Mark. He deserves to know who did this to Michael and have some semblance of closure. Not only does Mark want answers, but so does Detective Berardi. He's been on the case since day one, and it has certainly stuck with him. The Daily Freeman reported something he'd said recently at a town police station interview. The article stated, quote, "I was a detective originally when this case came in, and ultimately it rests on my shoulders. I'm responsible for bringing this guy or girl to justice. I took it from the beginning, and now ultimately it rests with me. You don't just put it in a drawer and forget about it because it's a victim. It's somebody who didn't ask for this to happen to him." If you know anything at all about who killed Michael Kleiman or know anyone who displayed those characteristics police have asked about, please contact the Ulster County Police Department at 845-382-1111, or you can use the Ulster County PD's anonymous tip line at 845-336-3784. Thank you all so much for tuning in every week. We're so happy to have you here. Make sure to leave us a 5-star review before you go and follow us on our socials.
You can follow us on Instagram at wicked.deeds.podcast and on Twitter at wickeddeeds. Don't forget to visit our website, wickeddeedspodcast.com, to take a look at any photos from this episode and view our source material.
But most importantly, tune in next week for an all-new episode.